Alrighty, now we're on to week 129 of World War II. February 13th, 1942. German army surrounded. You did not see that coming. Let's dive in.
Hello? Hey Manuel, what's up? You what? You want to be neutral. You want to be independent and neutral. Oh, okay. Well, how come? Because then the armies will leave your people alone. Dude, what war do you think you're involved in? Yeah, I'll talk to you later.
I don't know who that
February
could be referencing.
13th, 1942. So let's say that you're the Germans, and you have some ships on the French Atlantic coast, but they're not so safe there, so you want them in home waters.
Yes.
What do? Maybe you just roll the dice and sail them right up the English Channel.
I don't think that's a smart thing to do.
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week saw Soviet attacks still unable to break the Germans at Rzhev or Vyazma. In North Africa, German commander Erwin Rommel stopped his attacks when told he'll get no supplies anytime soon. The U.S. Navy launched the Marshall's Gilbert's raids against the Japanese, and the Japanese advanced in Burma, and they took Amboina, but were unable to make headway in the Philippines. Now trying to undermine local resistance there, Japanese Prime Minister Hideki Tojo promises the Philippines that they will be recognized as independent as part of Japan's greater Southeast Asia co-prosperity sphere. Philippine President Manuel Quezon, holed up in the Malinta Tunnel and sick with tuberculosis, cables out.
Oh, he's dead. TB? 1940s? Oh, he ain't making it. I don't know what happened to my boy Arthur Morgan.
That America's failure
So that was 1899. Rest in peace, my man.
to send reinforcements or relief doomed the Philippines to almost total extinction. On the 8th, he asks American President Franklin Roosevelt to grant immediate independence so the Philippines can be neutral, and then all foreign
That Manuel.
forces of any stripe would withdraw.
I don't think the Japanese would listen. Something tells me the Japanese are not. The current Japanese administration in 1942 is not the kind to obey your neutrality.
Philippine Forces Commander Douglas MacArthur cables Washington the 9th. You must determine whether or not the mission of delay would be better furthered by temporizing of Quezon or by my continued battle effort. FDR writes back, emphatically deny the possibility of the government's agreeing to the political aspect of President Quezon's proposal. Army Chief of Staff George Marshall tells MacArthur there will be no talk of surrender as long as any resistance is possible. Quezon will be evacuated to Australia to run a government in exile. The Japanese siege of Bataan will continue. The Japanese also now have Singapore Island under siege. For all that they have aerial and naval supremacy here, though, the Japanese have done a pretty poor job of preventing reinforcements from arriving or people from evacuating. But although there are around 100,000 Allied troops or so now in Singapore, the bulk of them are of questionable quality. 20 of the 21 Indian battalions are still in disarray from weeks of hard combat, and 17 of them are actually now just amalgamations of the original units cobbled together. What were 3 British battalions in the 3rd Indian Corps are now just 1. The 18th British Division has just arrived, but they've spent 2 years training for open battle.
God, look at the veins. They are so dehydrated. My God.
Not siege and island warfare. Most of the Australian 8th Division is in okay shape, but though they have like 2,000 reinforcements, many of them have never even fired a gun. That's how little training they've had.
Ooh, that's not
For
good.
his defenses, Commander Arthur Parsival does not heed ABDA Commander Archie Wavell's advice to put his freshest troops, the British 18th, at the northwest of the island by the narrowest part of the Straits of Johor. He puts them and his main artillery in the northeast. He puts Gordon Bennett's Australians and the 44th Indian Brigade in the northwest and scatters the rest of his force in beach defenses around the island. His intel has told him the Japanese have 150,000 men and 300 tanks for the attack. That is more than twice what they actually do have. The Japanese underestimate their enemy's strength, though, and the British have the artillery advantage 226 to 168. And yes, contrary to what you may have heard, most of those guns are not aimed only out to sea, and they can fire on Johor. They do not, however, have high explosive shells that are good to use against troops, but have mainly armor-piercing ones. Japanese commander Tomoyuki Yamashita has ammunition issues of his own, so he plans to strike fast and hard and force a surrender by February 11th. He also does intend to land at the northwest corner of the island. At 10:30 the evening of the 8th, the first of his 3 assault waves begins to cross the straits. The defenders do a pretty good job considering their numbers and deployment, but soon enough, the lack of muzzle flashes show the Japanese where gaps are in the wide defense front, and not long after that, they've breached to the rear of the Australian positions, and hard-fighting units have to retreat to avoid being cut up piecemeal. The defenders could
I thought they had like 80,000 men there.
have hit much of the assault force before it landed, but no order
How's that not enough men?
to turn on the searchlights to light up the assault ships was ever received by the artillery. By dawn the 9th, the Japanese are pouring through huge gaps in the defense line. By morning, the Japanese have gotten some 12,000 men to the island. Rear Admiral Ernest Spooner, commander of the naval base, wants to mount a counterattack by bringing reinforcements from all points, but Percival thinks the Japanese have landed way more men than they actually have, and he says no. That night, the Japanese Imperial Guards Division tries to reach the island from where the Johor Causeway lies submerged. One whole company of it is incinerated by a gasoline trap sprung by engineers. But with the retreat of the brigade on the Allied left flank, the Guards soon turn defeat into victory. Winston Churchill declares the 10th, there must be no thought of sparing the troops or the population. Commanders and senior officers should die with their troops. The honor of the British Empire and the British Army is at stake.
Jesus. You're right.
All 3 Japanese divisions are on the island that day, and around midnight they take the reservoirs. The defenders now have limited water. Yamashita, however, has by then realized that he's way outnumbered, and he has to win quickly, even if it's by bluffing his way to victory. The Japanese situation at sunrise February 12th appeared to them serious, if not desperate. The 25th Army was outnumbered, outgunned, scattered, and nearly out of ammunition. A lesser general would have turned cautious, but not Yamashita. Percival, however, was morally defeated and incapable of directing or inspiring effective resistance. But Percival still isn't surrendering. As the week ends, his senior commanders meet. Bennett and Lewis Heath, commanding the Indian Corps, both think more resistance is useless. Percival says, I have my honor to consider, and there's also the question of what posterity will think of us if we surrender this large army and valuable fortress. By Percival's own account, Heath says, you need not bother about your honor. You lost that a long time ago up in the north.
Dissed.
That night, Spooner orders all remaining ships to sail away. Some 44 ships carrying around 3,000 passengers, including Spooner, do. If you think that the Japanese just allowed these to leave, then you are very much mistaken, for Japanese planes do not, and the waters in the islands from Singapore to Sumatra and Java are soon littered with bodies, wrecks, oil, and survivors of all stripes. More on these stories next week. Singapore is not the only island under Axis attack, nor the only of great importance. There's also Malta. Increasingly, the fate of the Allied armies in North Africa, and hence the Middle East, was tied to that of Malta. And it's fairly obvious, the stronger Erwin Rommel gets, the worse it gets for the Allies. His North African offensive in late January and early this month that pushed the British back in Cyrenaica was a disaster specifically for Malta, though, because the success of any convoy relied on the British holding forward airfields in Libya from which air cover could be provided, and came at a time when the problem of resupplying Malta was becoming ever more pressing.
Okay.
In January, the British Admiralty was warned that without major reinforcements of both planes and ships, running supply convoys to Malta would be dangerous to the point of impossible, and that would make holding Malta impossible. In December and January, there were 432 Italian and German air raids on Malta. A convoy was finally organized this week, since aviation fuel and other supplies are in short supply on Malta, and 3 merchant ships set sail the 12th, but Axis planes from Libya bomb it so badly it has to return to Alexandria. The supplies cannot get through. It is the Germans that are having supply issues, though, in the Soviet Union. The Soviets have by now isolated some 100,000 Germans in the Demyansk pocket, and that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
There is an outer ring.
Good job, Russia. Good job. Good job. Good job. You did something.
From Lake Ilmen, east of Staraya Russa, and then south to Belabelka. The Germans are trapped to the east. Between Belabelka and Kholm is a...
Belabelka could be like a vocal stem right there. I like how it rolls. Belabelka. I like it.
A gap of like 40 kilometers covered by partisans and Red Army ski units. There's like 30 or so kilometers between the inner and outer rings. A smaller pocket of Germans is also surrounded at Kholm. Now, the one at Demyansk has 2 airfields, at Demyansk and Pesky. So the Germans are supplying their trapped forces by air bridge. At Kholm, they have to be supplied only by air drops, but it is a much smaller force there. These aerial maneuvers and ins and outs will be much easier from the end of this week when the temperatures become significantly higher than they've been the past 2 months. Meanwhile, Soviet Western Theater Commander Georgy Zhukov has a crisis facing him at Rzhev. German Panzer General Walter Model has managed to cut off part of the Soviet 29th and 39th armies from their communications and split the 29th and 39th apart, so the 39th is semi-encircled by now. In response, Stavka issues orders to both the Kalinin and Western fronts to give it everything they've got and wipe out the Germans in the Rzhev, Vyazma, Yukhnov region, so that by March the 5th, the Soviets have reached the Dnieper-Yelnya line,
God, they're still
while the
pushing
Western
for
Front
that?
would liberate Bryansk. So Ivan Konyev's Kalinin Front is getting 7 rifle divisions, 4 aviation regiments, and a Guards Rifle Corps, while the Western Front is getting 60,000 troop reinforcements, 3 rifle divisions, also a Guards Rifle Corps, 200 tanks, 400 planes, and 2 parachute brigades. Well, that changes things, right? So Zhukov makes plans for 3 armies from the Kalinin Front to take Olenino region, 3 from the Western Front to take Yukhnov, and 2 new armies on the left wing to go all the way to Bryansk. Then they could close in on Vyazma and Rzhev, and then eliminate the Demyansk and Rzhev pockets, and then destroy German Army Group Center. While all this is going to be going on, he's going to send his whole parachute corps, 3 brigades and a battalion, west of Yukhnov to break into the enemy from the rear. There are also big plans being made in the Crimea. If it can be liberated, then Soviet bombers would once again be in a position to threaten the Romanian oil fields that supply Germany. The Crimean Front was created within the Red Army back on January 28th under Dmitry Kozlov, and his orders for a Crimean offensive are to thrust towards Karasu Bazar, west of Feodosia, and from there break into the rear of the German 11th Army that's besieging Sevastopol. The Red Fleet will make an amphibious assault on Sudak, southwest of Feodosia, while also supporting 44th Army operations out from Akhmonai. Reinforcements have been arriving, including a bunch of brand new T-34 tanks. Joseph Stalin is so concerned about the success of this venture that he sends down Deputy Defense Commissar Lev Meklis to supervise things. Now, you might remember a quote from last June.
Nope, I do not.
From John Erickson, I said about Meklis. He combined a monumental incompetence with a fierce detestation of the officer corps.
I don't remember it, nope.
Monumental. He heads down to Kerch and has even ordered the Inspector General of Soviet Armored Forces to come as well to supervise the tanks. The attack is supposed to go off at the end of the week on the 13th, but is postponed until the 27th. And in the north, the 2nd Shock Army has gone through the gap the Soviets broke in German Army Group North, making for Lyuban. The 52nd and 59th Armies are to widen the gap and protect communications with Second Shock at all costs. The Germans are focusing on trapping Second Shock. It's been a couple of weeks of fighting, and the communications are now secure against even German artillery. But that is all the Soviets can manage to do. Stalin is not pleased. Nor is British High Command with events that happened just off the home islands this week. On the 11th comes the Channel Dash, when German battlecruiser Scharnhorst Gneisenau and heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen make a bold run from Brest to the northern German ports. There are only piecemeal attacks on them made, but both battlecruisers are damaged by mines. Damage to Scharnhorst is pretty serious. This is a slap in the face to British naval power, and the British public is appalled that it happens so easily. But it does
They managed to get through? Okay.
actually help the British strategically, since it's easier to guard against attacks from German ships when they're in German or Norwegian bases than French ones.
That's true.
Here are a couple of notes to end the week. On the 9th, the French liner Normandie catches fire in the harbor at New York, where it's been since seized by the U.S. The fire was started by a welder's torch, but there are many conspiracy theories about it. After midnight, the ship capsizes and sinks to the bottom of the Hudson River. On the 8th, Fritz Todt, German arms and munitions minister, is killed in a plane crash. We've seen a lot of him, as you may remember, in his capacity of organizing engineering works largely with forced labor. The German war industries have been fairly inefficiently run until Todt's brief appointment when more sensible priorities were established. At this time, when compared with Britain or the USSR, Germany is not well mobilized for war. As yet, the German people have had no real cuts in their standards of living when compared with peacetime conditions. This is gradually changing under the impetus of Todt's measures and the effect of the first defeats in the USSR. Albert Speer will replace him. Oh, total side note here. That reminds me that I forgot to mention that Charles Hunziker died in a plane crash back
He's gone!
November 11th. Sorry. Many of you no doubt remember him for his role in the Battle of France. And the week comes to
His role in losing it? He's the one I'm thinking of, right?
its end, with Singapore in dire jeopardy, Malta in somewhat less dire jeopardy, encircled German troops in the USSR in jeopardy, and a brazen run by the Germans up the channel.
Not in jeopardy.
It's a pretty rough week for British command. Singapore looks like it'll fall at any moment. Malta can't be supplied and may well fall soon, and Rommel could go on the move at any time, and that could all spell disaster for Suez. And then how would the British even maintain contact with India or Australia or oil without adding weeks to ocean voyages? And we saw last week the British can't read the German naval codes anymore, and U-boats are seriously active in the Atlantic. And on top of all that, when they think, hey, at least it's going bad for the Germans in the USSR, the Germans sail a bunch of ships right up the channel, right under their noses, right up the channel. At least it cannot get much worse. No, wait. It can.
Yeah, it can.
It can get a lot worse. A whole hell of a lot worse.
Man, when was the last time Indy swore on this one? Can't remember.
If you would like to learn more about the British Empire before the
And that was week 129 of World War II, February 13th, 1942. German army surrounded. You did not see that coming. Again, as I said with the last episode, there's nothing much to say with this one. I really don't think there's going to be much to say until Midway, I think, is the next big like war event. So I don't, or whenever Roosevelt starts putting the Japanese in the camps, the internment camps, and the detention camps is, I think, the American way of saying it. Or has he already started doing that? Can't remember. No, I don't think he started doing that. I think we're still a little too early. Um, I want to say he starts doing it in 1942 though. Anyways, whichever comes first, Midway or the Japanese, uh, the American Japanese camps. Yeah. Next episode.